So this is my basic white bread recipe. This is going to make 2 loaves. I'm starting with, this is 7 cups of bread flour. I don't use all-purpose flour. All-purpose flour sucks for making bread. You really want to use a higher protein flour, like a bread flour. This is going to have gluten, and it's going to be better nutrition-wise for you than an all-purpose flour, which has basically everything stripped from it. So to this, we're going to add 2 tablespoons of yeast. And I always mix the yeast in just a little bit, so I lose part of my flour there, because you don't want to add the salt directly to the yeast. Salt will kill the yeast. And now I'm going to add 2 tablespoons of oil. This is just light extra virgin olive oil. You can add any kind of oil as long as it's, vegetable oil, canola oil, whatever. 3 cups of water. Everybody in the pool. Now, I may actually switch from mixing this and use a large wooden spoon. I'm going to see how it goes here with my scraper first. If it starts to get too much of a pain in the ass, this isn't too bad. It's like playing with paper mache at this point. Alright, now before I get it too involved here, I'm going to add 3 teaspoons of salt. I always use sea salt because you don't want iodine in it, because the iodine is antimicrobial and will completely destroy any of your yeast. So yeah, I'm going to switch to one of my large wooden spoons for a moment.
Thomas, hush, baby.
Now you could do this in a mixer if you have one big enough, but I typically don't put anything in my mixer if it's more than 4 cups. This is almost twice that, so yeah.
If she was making a small loaf, would she use the bread hook?
If you're making any kind of bread, you'd use the bread hook if you're doing it in a mixer.
Okay.
That's what it's for. It simulates the kneading process. Which, in a minute, I'm going to turn this out onto the counter and start to work it into an actual dough. Because we're just about got all the shagginess here. As you can see, it's not really coming together. I mean, most of the flour has been hydrated at this point. There's very little of it, except for what's on bottom that's still dry. But with this much, it's really hard to work it properly unless you're doing it by hand. And now we've got it out on the counter. You can see it breaks apart pretty easily. It's mainly just a wet, clumpy mess. So we're just going to keep folding it in on itself and turning it 90 degrees. Well, 45 degrees, I guess.
A rotation?
Yep. Until it starts to come together. And it's going to be sticky at first, but as the gluten starts to form, it's going to become a lot less sticky. Now, I may be going fast. I'm going to try to slow this down. As you can see, what I'm doing is I'm putting the palms of my hands into this and I'm pushing it out and then kind of quarter turning it as I roll it back up.
Here, I'll stand up and get a
Now, I wonder if this is coming together enough that I can do my... So, it's starting to come together. It's nowhere near as sticky as it once was. Still got some good stick to it, but it's nowhere near like wet paste anymore. It's more like wet clay.
It's even pulled it off your fingers.
So what I'm going to do now, this is a French method called autolyse. What this means is I'm going to put it in this bowl and cover it and let it sit for about a half an hour because the flour needs to hydrate. There's still, even though it looks like it's all one big wet mess, there's still minuscule particles of flour in there that need to soak up that water. So it's got to sit for about a half an hour and then I'm going to come back and start stretching it. So now that this is rested a little bit, you can definitely see that it has soaked up. You know, the closer you get, you're just washing it out.
Sorry.
It's the flour has soaked it up and it's looking more, you can actually stretch it and you can see that it actually has some stretch to it. So here's my process for working, stretching the gluten out and making it form, is I'm going to lift it and you can actually see how the strands are starting to tear. Don't let it tear all the way through. I just punch it down and then I scrape the side and grab another strand, pull it up, and tuck it into the center. Lift it up, tuck it into the center, and you can see each time I'm doing this, it's stretching less and less because the gluten strands are tightening. Okay, now once I've gone around the entire ball, now it's tightened right up like a tight rubber band because I've worked the gluten, so now I'm going to let it sit. And I'm going to do this every 15 minutes about 3 or 4 times. So this is going to take about an hour, and I'm just going to let it rest. 15 minutes later, I'll come back and do it again. And when I'm finished, then we'll move on to the next step. It has increased in size, and the gluten structure is extremely visible. Plus, you can see like these little bubbles of air pockets are forming. So we're now going to take it out of the bowl and gather it all up into a central mass and basically divide it into its 2 individual dough balls because we're making 2 loaves here. So we're going to get it loose from the bowl. And as you can see, it's really not sticky anyway. It's tacky. We don't want to completely punch it down. We want to keep some of the air in there, but we're going to lose a lot of it here. So I'm now going to just kind of gather it up. Hear the air squeaking out of it.
You can hear the tummy squeaking too.
Now, if you're wondering what I'm doing here, if you notice, I'm creating surface tension. You notice I put my hands right here, and I'm like flat against the bottom, and then I'm pulling the dough ball towards me, and that makes it tuck under itself on the back side, so that's creating tension on the surface. What that does is, as the yeast creates CO2 inside, the tighter the surface is, it's going to force it to expand. So you're helping it rise by making sure it's nice and tight on top. Okay, so we're going to try to divide this equally. So let's say that should give us 2 even dough balls. So now I'm just going to pull this all into the middle. And again, just like you just saw me do a second ago, I'm going to create that surface tension.
Nanook. Say hi to Val.
Same thing here.
Hold on.
What's the next lesson? Lesson number 2. Final story.
Okay. And there's our 2 dough balls, which I am now going to cover because this is the bench rise. And I'm going to let them sit for about a half an hour, and then we will do our final shaping on them and put them in our loaf pans. Okay, so
I was just getting the size.
as you can see, our
You have a sous chef.
our what?
Sous chef.
Yeah, it's a Bork chef. Yeah, they've gotten a little bit bigger here with the bench rest. So what we now have to do is shape these so that they'll fit into our loaf pans. And how we are going to do that is by gently lifting them off, and we're just going to lightly press them down. I don't want to completely degas them, but I want to press them down. And now give it a little bit of a stretch. Now, you see I'm kind of stretching this in a triangular shape because I'm going to roll it up. But I don't want it to be wider than my loaf pan. So now that I've got it stretched out, I'm going to start to roll and give it a little tuck. Roll, give it a little tuck. And then we take it, seam side down into our loaf pan. Same thing here.
You want me to bring it over?
And there we go. They are into their final rise. And I'm going to let them rest for maybe half hour, 45 minutes, and then they will go into a 400-degree oven. All right. And there we go. 2 loaves of freshly baked white sandwich bread. That's all there is to it. Made it look easy, didn't I?